Have you ever wondered what blood truly means when weighed against wealth and prestige? Family is supposed to be a safe harbor, but sometimes the people who gave us life are the most cold-blooded enemies we never expected. The story I am about to tell is not just a family tragedy, it is a perfectly timed revenge, calculated down to the very last second by someone who was always 10 steps ahead. Hello, dear listeners of Maya Revenge Stories. Unfortunately, YouTube has completely demonetized our channel, leaving us with zero budget to keep the lights on. If you enjoy our stories today, please consider supporting us with just $1 so we can pay our hardworking staff to cover their living expenses and continue creating these videos for you. You can easily do this by scanning the QR code on your screen or clicking the donation link in the video description or the pinned comment. My name is Veronica Walters. I am 28 years old, and my world effectively ended on a terribly mundane Tuesday afternoon. I was sitting at my desk at the Seattle headquarters of NovaStream Analytics, mindlessly scrolling through lines of corporate data. When my phone shattered the quiet focus of the office, the caller ID flashed the name of a prominent local hospital. When I answered, a clinical, heavily practiced voice on the other end delivered a message that instantly paralyzed my lungs. My older sister, Clara, who had just turned 34 last month, had collapsed. She had suffered a massive, catastrophic hemorrhagic stroke. Clara was not just my sister, she was a fiercely independent software engineer, a brilliant mind who built lucrative tech empires out of sheer willpower and lines of code. But to me, she was so much more than her success. She was my shield. Growing up in a cold household where our parents viewed their children merely as accessories or future investments, Clara was the only person who genuinely loved, nurtured, and protected me. She was my entire family in every way that actually mattered. I abandoned my workstation immediately, sprinting out of the glass building and driving recklessly through the relentless Seattle rain. When I finally burst through the heavy double doors of the intensive care unit, the sharp smell of antiseptic and the rhythmic, merciless beeping of the life support monitors assaulted my senses. The lead neurologist pulled me aside into a harshly lit corridor. His eyes carried that terrible, heavy weight of pity reserved exclusively for the hopeless cases. He told me, in no uncertain terms, that Clara was not going to survive. Her brain had sustained irreversible, fatal bleeding. Her remaining time on this earth was no longer measured in weeks or even days, but in mere hours. He urged me to contact the rest of our family immediately so they could make arrangements to say their final goodbyes. The rest of the family consisted solely of Richard and Monica, the two people who technically provided our genetics but never once acted like actual parents. At that exact moment, they were thousands of miles away, rubbing elbows with the ultra-rich at a lavish, exclusive golf resort in Palm Beach, Florida. I knew exactly what they were doing. They were undoubtedly sipping expensive cocktails by a pristine pool, bragging to wealthy strangers about Clara's tech money, completely oblivious to the fact that their golden goose was bleeding out on a hospital bed. My hands shook violently as I pulled up my contacts and dialed my father's number. It rang and rang, the agonizing sound echoing in my ear until the automated voicemail system finally picked up. I hung up and tried my mother's cell phone. I got the exact same result. I called them 4 separate times in the span of 10 minutes. Absolute silence, panic, grief, and a burning rage bubbled up in my throat, forced into a corner with time rapidly slipping away. I typed out a desperate, frantic text message. I explained the catastrophic nature of the stroke, the doctor's grim and final prognosis, and I begged them to book a flight to Seattle immediately because their eldest daughter was dying. I hit send, gripping the plastic casing of my phone so hard my knuckles turned a stark white. I dragged a plastic chair to Clara's bedside and sat down, holding her limp, terribly pale hand in both of mine. The silence of the isolation room was suffocating, broken only by the mechanical hissing of the ventilator forcing air into her lungs. Every 60 seconds felt like an eternity. Then, suddenly, my phone vibrated violently against my thigh. I snatched it up in a heartbeat, desperately hoping for an incoming call. or at least a text message demanding the hospital address or flight details. Instead, I stared down at a single, brief text response from Richard. It read, "We will come if she actually dies. You are there anyway. So it is better if you handle it. Last-minute flights are expensive." I stopped breathing. The air in the room seemed to vanish. A wave of pure, unfiltered nausea washed over me, chilling my blood. I read the agonizing words again, and then a third time, just to be sure my tear-filled eyes were not deceiving me. My own parents were literally weighing the financial cost of a commercial plane ticket against the final, fading moments of their daughter's life. The sheer, unadulterated cruelty of that calculation, the absolute lack of basic human decency, was staggering. I collapsed forward, resting my forehead against the cold metal railing of the hospital bed, utterly crushed by the sickening reality of the monsters they truly were. In that moment of profound, paralyzing despair, I felt a faint, almost imperceptible twitch against my palm. I snapped my head up, gasping for air. Clara's eyes were open. They were cloudy, fighting a losing battle against the overwhelming physical damage in her brain. But she was undeniably conscious. Her gaze, though weak, slowly shifted downward. It landed directly on the brightly lit screen of my phone, which was still firmly clutched in my trembling hand, resting right beside her arm. The screen was glaringly bright in the dim, shadowed hospital room, clearly and unmistakably displaying Richard's message. She read it. I knew she comprehended the words, because the jagged green line on her heart rate monitor spiked sharply for a brief second. I lunged forward to pull the phone away, desperate to shield her from this final, unforgivable betrayal in her last moments. But I was vastly too late. The icy truth of our parents' greed had been laid bare in the cold fluorescent light. I braced myself for the cardiac monitor to blare, expecting the sheer shock of that text message to finally break her failing heart, but the erratic green spike on the screen leveled out into a steady, albeit weak, rhythm. Clara did not cry. Her eyes, though heavily clouded by the massive hemorrhage that was slowly drowning her brain, held absolutely no shock. There was only a profound, bitter clarity radiating from her gaze. She looked at me, and I saw a woman who was entirely unsurprised by the cold-blooded nature of the people who had brought us into this world. I was the one standing there suffocating on my own sobs, completely unspooled by grief. Meanwhile, she, the patient with merely hours left to live, lay trapped in that sterile bed with the terrifying, absolute calm of a grandmaster chess player staring down a final, inevitable checkmate. She squeezed my fingers. It was a shockingly weak, trembling pressure, a mere shadow of her usual strength, but it carried the heavy weight of absolute authority. Her dry lips parted, and a raspy, strained whisper forced its way out of her throat. "Stop crying, Veronica," she breathed, her voice barely carrying over the mechanical hiss of the life support machines. "Tears are a pointless luxury, and we cannot afford them right now. Prop my shoulders up. Then, take your phone out and press record." I desperately wanted to argue, to beg her to conserve whatever fading strength she had left, but the fierce, commanding intensity in her fading eyes stopped me dead in my tracks. I did exactly as I was told, wiping my wet cheeks with the back of my sleeve. I carefully adjusted her pillows, framing her pale, sweat-slicked face against the harsh white background of the hospital room, and I firmly hit the red button on my camera application. Clara did not waste her final, precious breaths on sentimental goodbyes or poetic regrets about a life cut tragically short. She stared directly into the digital lens, her posture stiffening as her voice gained a momentary, unnatural strength fueled entirely by adrenaline and cold spite. "Veronica, you need to listen to me very carefully," she commanded, her tone entirely devoid of fear. "Reach into my leather work bag, pull out my primary laptop, and open the secure, encrypted browser. Go to the dark web portal I showed you last year. The passphrase is a combination of our old street name and the exact time of our grandmother's passing." My trembling fingers flew across the sleek keyboard of her machine. Hot tears continuously blurred my vision as I blindly navigated through complex layers of encrypted firewalls, following her rapid-fire instructions until a hidden, personal cloud server suddenly materialized on the bright screen. "You are currently looking at my entire life's work," Clara whispered, her breathing growing noticeably shallower with every passing minute. "Every single patent I have filed, every line of proprietary code, every hidden offshore asset. Richard and Monica will inevitably try to swoop in and take all of it the second my heart stops. We are going to ensure that they choke on their own greed." Under her meticulous, brilliant direction, we activated a dormant security protocol she had secretly built years ago. It was a dead man's switch. The foundational concept was brutally simple, yet the execution was flawlessly complex. It was an automated, self-executing digital script tied directly to the very core of her sprawling financial and technological empire. "If I do not manually authenticate my retinal biometrics and type my master password into this specific server within exactly 7 days," Clara explained, pausing painfully to gasp for a lungful of air, "the switch automatically flips. The system will recognize that I am deceased." She then outlined the devastating payload of that switch with chilling clinical precision. It was not just a simple wealth transfer meant to protect her money. It was a heavily armed digital guillotine poised over our parents' necks. "When that timer hits 0, she continued, her eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that burned, "everything I own instantly transfers into an irrevocable blind trust that only you control. But more importantly, it will trigger a mass, encrypted dissemination of heavily guarded data. I need you to promise me something right now. Over the next few weeks, our parents will put on a spectacular, sickening show. They will use my tragic death to line their own pockets and elevate their social status. You must let them do it." She gripped my hand tighter, her nails digging into my skin. "Do not confront them. Do not cause a public scene. Do not let your anger show. You must play the role of the grieving, submissive, helpless younger daughter perfectly. Give them enough rope to hang themselves completely. Promise me." I nodded slowly, the camera phone trembling slightly in my sweating hands. "I promise, Clara," I swore, my voice thick with a heavy grief that was rapidly morphing into cold, hard, unbreakable resolve. "I will do exactly as you say." "Good," she murmured, a faint, almost invisible ghost of a satisfied smile touching the corners of her pale lips. "The trap is set." The monumental effort of engineering her own posthumous revenge had completely drained her final reserves of physical energy. The red recording light on the camera kept blinking steadily as her heavy eyelids slowly fluttered shut. The rhythmic, mechanical pumping of the ventilator continued its hollow work, but the fragile, tethered connection to the brilliant, beautiful mind inside that failing body was rapidly severing. We spent the next 3 hours in absolute, suffocating silence. I sat rigidly beside her bed, clutching the heavy laptop that now held a ticking digital time bomb against my chest. Watching the rise and fall of her chest become increasingly shallow and erratic, just past midnight, on a bleak and rainy Wednesday morning, Clara took one final, shuddering breath. The green line on the monitor flatlined, and the machine emitted a long, piercing, continuous tone. My sister died exactly in the manner she had lived her entire life. She left behind a perfectly calculated, utterly unbreakable system, and a catastrophic storm that our parents would never, ever see coming. 3 weeks passed, exactly 21 days after the sharp, flat tone of the heart monitor signaled the end of my sister's life. My parents proved Clara right in the most grotesque way imaginable. There was no quiet, somber funeral. There was no private gathering of close friends to mourn a brilliant soul. Instead, Richard and Monica weaponized their eldest daughter's corpse to throw the social event of the season. They transformed her tragic death into a highly publicized, glittering public relations spectacle hosted in the grand ballroom of a wildly expensive 5-star hotel right in the heart of downtown Seattle. They christened their grand performance the Clara Memorial Foundation. It was billed as an exclusive charity gala, an invitation-only gathering of several hundred venture capitalists, local politicians, and the upper crust of high society. The grand ballroom was dripping in opulence. Crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceilings, casting a warm golden glow over tables draped in imported silk linens. Waiters in pristine white jackets circulated with silver trays of caviar and vintage champagne, while a string quartet played melancholy classical music in the background. It was a perfectly staged, nauseatingly polished theater of grief. To the reporters scribbling on their notepads and the photographers snapping endless pictures, my parents were the tragic, noble figures determined to keep their daughter's visionary tech dream alive. But beneath the veneer of white lilies and designer morning wear, the foundation was nothing more than a meticulously crafted, hollow shell. It was an elaborate, desperate financial vehicle designed entirely for money laundering. Richard and Monica were using this high-profile charity front to legally bypass probate and funnel the entirety of Clara's vast intellectual property directly into a failing offshore shell company Richard secretly controlled. They were attempting to swallow tens of millions of dollars in proprietary software code, highly lucrative patents, and automated trading algorithms. They truly believed that because she died without a publicly registered spouse or children, they were the undisputed heirs to her digital kingdom. They were essentially throwing a lavish party to celebrate their own massive payday, funded entirely by the ghost of the daughter they had abandoned. I was fully aware of the grift, but I remembered my promise to Clara. I played my role to absolute perfection. Before the doors even opened to the public, Monica had cornered me in one of the private dressing rooms. She thrust a plain, overly conservative, terribly unflattering black dress into my chest. She grabbed my upper arm, her manicured acrylic nails digging sharply into my skin, and delivered her instructions through a tight, terrifyingly fake smile. "You will sit at table 47, right in the back near the kitchen doors," she hissed, her eyes darting around to ensure no event staff were listening. "You will not speak to the press. You will not give any interviews. If you so much as utter one single syllable that contradicts our narrative tonight, or if you cause any sort of scene, we will legally cut you off from every cent of the family estate and ensure you never find employment in this city again. Do you understand me, Veronica?" I had looked directly into her cold, calculating eyes, offered a submissive, terrified little nod, and whispered, "Yes, Mother, I understand perfectly." So, I sat in the shadows exactly where I was placed. I blended into the dark velvet curtains at the very edge of the grand ballroom, practically invisible to the sea of wealthy socialites who were busy clinking their crystal glasses and discussing profit margins. Up on the brightly lit main stage, the performance of the decade was reaching its climax. Richard stood behind a sleek, transparent acrylic podium, wearing a bespoke, midnight black tuxedo. Monica stood rigidly by his side, clad in a custom designer gown that easily cost $5,000, her face artfully painted to look hollowed out by sorrow. Richard leaned into the microphone, his voice expertly modulated to tremble at all the right moments. "Our hearts are entirely shattered," Richard announced to the hushed, attentive crowd, lifting a manicured hand to wipe a perfectly timed, non-existent tear from the corner of his eye. The flashbulbs from the press pool erupted in a blinding white wave. But Clara would not want us to wallow in despair. She was a pioneer. She wanted her technology to change the world. Through your generous donations tonight, we will ensure that her incredible legacy lives on forever. The audience erupted into a wave of sympathetic, thundering applause. Some of the older women in the front row even dabbed their eyes with silk handkerchiefs. The sheer, unadulterated hypocrisy of it all was thick enough to choke on. They were mourning a woman they had never met, funding the luxurious lifestyle of two absolute monsters who could not even be bothered to buy a plane ticket to watch their own child die. I did not applaud. I did not cry. I sat completely motionless at my isolated table in the back corner, slowly sipping a glass of iced tap water. My right hand rested casually beneath the heavy silk tablecloth. My thumb was gently, methodically stroking the smooth glass screen of my phone, I had the specialized, encrypted application open and running perfectly. Over the past 3 weeks, following the detailed digital map Clara had left behind, I had silently bypassed the hotel's security firewalls. My device was now completely, seamlessly synchronized with the master audiovisual control board of the entire ballroom, every microphone, every speaker, and the massive, high-definition LED screens hanging directly behind my parents were waiting for my command. I watched them soak in the applause, bathing in their stolen glory. They thought they had won. They thought they were the smartest people in the room. They had absolutely no idea that the stage they were standing on was about to become their scaffold. The applause slowly died down, replaced by the hushed, expectant silence of a room filled with deep pockets and shallow conscience. Up on the grand stage, Richard adjusted the microphone stand. The subtle squeak of metal echoed through the towering speakers. He gripped the edges of the acrylic podium, bowing his head just enough to catch the dramatic overhead lighting. "Tonight," Richard began, his voice dropping an octave, perfectly feigning a father struggling to hold back a sob. "We are not just asking for your sympathy. We are asking you to join us in building the Clara Innovations Seed Fund. We are opening the floor to direct VIP pledges. Our initial goal for this evening is $25 million. Every single cent will go toward funding the kind of revolutionary, boundary-pushing software development that our darling daughter championed." He paused, letting the massive sum hang in the air, allowing the greed of the room to disguise itself as philanthropy. He then turned his body slightly, raising his right hand toward the glass-enclosed audiovisual booth situated high above the ballroom floor. "Before we begin the pledging process," Richard announced, his tone shifting to one of heavy fabricated nostalgia, "I want to share a short film with you all. A look back at the beautiful, incredibly happy life of our little girl." It was the cue for the highly produced montage they had commissioned. It was supposed to be a sickeningly sweet compilation of purchased stock footage and heavily doctored childhood photographs, carefully cropped to create the illusion of a warm, loving family unit. As the massive, state-of-the-art LED screen spanning 60 feet across the back of the stage began to hum with power, a shadow detached itself from the VIP tables at the front. My mother, under the cover of the dimmed house lights. Monica moved with the silent, predatory grace of a viper. She glided past the oblivious tech investors and the weeping socialites, navigating the maze of silk-draped tables until she reached my isolated corner in the back. The heavy, suffocating scent of her expensive floral perfume arrived a second before she did. She leaned down, her face pressing uncomfortably close to my ear. I could feel the cold, hard metal of her diamond necklace brushing against my bare shoulder. "Eticia asked." "Listen to me very carefully," Monica whispered, her voice a harsh, venomous hiss entirely disconnected from the grieving mother routine she had just performed on stage. "My lawyer is waiting in the private suite upstairs, the absolute second this charade wraps up. You are going upstairs, and you are signing a complete, ironclad waiver renouncing your rights to any portion of your sister's estate. You will sign the intellectual property transfer, and you will walk away quietly. If you do this smoothly, I might let you keep your cheap little apartment. Do we have an understanding?" For 28 years, that exact tone would have sent me shrinking into a corner, paralyzed by the ingrained fear of her wrath. But sitting there in the dark, with the weight of Clara's final, brilliant trap resting literally at my fingertips, the fear was completely gone. It was replaced by something else entirely. Ice. I turned my head slowly. I did not shrink away. I looked directly into my mother's harsh, aggressively contoured face. I let my lips curl upward into a slow, terribly cold smile. A smile that I had never, ever shown her before. I watched the brief, confused flicker of hesitation cross her eyes as she realized I was not cowering. "There is no need to wait until the end of the party, Mother," I replied softly, my voice perfectly steady and clear. "Her will is being broadcast right now." Before Monica could process the meaning of those words, before she could even draw a breath to snap a furious response. I shifted my gaze back to the glowing screen of my phone hidden beneath the tablecloth. I lifted my thumb and firmly pressed the large red activation icon in the center of the customized application. The execution was instantaneous. The sheer, overwhelming brute force of Clara's encrypted code violently hijacked the hotel's entire network in less than a fraction of a second. High above us in the control booth, the technician's panicked shouting faintly penetrated the thick glass as his mixing board suddenly locked him out entirely. Down in the ballroom, the atmosphere snapped. The soft ambient music cutting out abruptly created a deafening, unnatural vacuum of sound. The massive 60-foot LED screen on the stage did not play the tear-jerking, fictionalized family montage. Instead, the screen flickered violently, strobing blinding white light for 2 agonizing seconds, forcing the entire audience to shield their eyes. Then, the screen plunged into total, pitch-black darkness. A heavy, confused murmur rippled through the hundreds of wealthy guests. Richard tapped the microphone, a look of genuine annoyance breaking through his mask of sorrow. He looked up at the booth, motioning wildly with his hands. But the system was no longer his. With a sharp, static crackle that echoed like a gunshot through the surround sound speakers, the massive display roared back to life. The soft, golden lighting of the ballroom was instantly overpowered by the harsh, bluish-white fluorescent glare of the intensive care unit projecting onto the screen. And there, magnified to a colossal scale, looming over the frozen, glittering crowd, was Clara. Her skin was terribly pale, her face framed by the grim reality of medical tubing and a stark white hospital gown. But her eyes, burning with an intense, razor-sharp fury, stared down from the screen like a descending god of vengeance. The storm had finally arrived. The video began not with melancholy strings or a gentle fade-in, but with the raw, rhythmic, terrifying hissing of the intensive care unit's ventilator. The sheer volume of it, pumped through the hotel's state-of-the-art surround sound system, physically vibrated the crystal centerpieces on the tables, the grand ballroom, previously buzzing with the polite chatter of high society networking, slammed into a state of absolute, dead silence. Hundreds of incredibly powerful, wealthy individuals froze in their seats, their champagne flutes suspended halfway to their mouths, staring up at the colossal 60-foot projection of a dying woman. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen." Clara's voice echoed through the massive space. It was breathy, terribly weak, scraping agonizingly against her vocal cords. Yet it possessed a steely, undeniable authority that instantly commanded the entire room. If you are watching this broadcast, it means my heart has stopped beating, and my parents are currently standing in front of you on that stage, asking for your money. She did not waste a single, precious breath on a dramatic pause. In the very next second, the harsh white hospital background behind her on the screen shifted. It was instantaneously replaced by a massive, high-definition screenshot of a text message thread. The caller identification header displayed the name Richard Walters, accompanied by a 10-digit phone number that every major investor sitting in the front row recognized immediately. Below it, towering 20 feet high, glowing and brutal, inescapable white text against a green bubble, was the message. "We will come if she actually dies. You are there anyway, so it is better if you handle it. Last-minute flights are expensive." A collective, physical gasp violently ripped through the VIP section. It was not a polite murmur of confusion. It was the visceral, audible sound of pure, unadulterated horror. The elegantly dressed socialites, who had just been weeping delicately onto their silk handkerchiefs, now had their hands clamped tightly over their mouths. Down on the main stage, the carefully constructed illusion of the grieving father shattered into a million jagged pieces. Richard physically recoiled from the acrylic podium as if it had suddenly caught fire. His meticulously applied stage makeup could no longer hide the sudden sickly gray pallor draining the life from his face. Monica, who had just been threatening me at table 47, let out a shrill, completely undignified shriek. She abandoned her intimidation tactics, spinning around and clawing her way blindly through the tightly packed chairs, desperately trying to reach her husband in the spotlight. "Cut it!" Richard roared, his voice cracking with pure panic, completely abandoning his polished persona. He lunged wildly toward the side of the stage, screaming at the event staff hidden in the wings. "Shut the main breaker off! Cut the power to the stage right now!" Security guards in sharp black suits scrambled frantically, shouting furiously into their wrist communicators. But Clara was, as always, 10 steps ahead of them. The heavy oak ballroom doors had electronically sealed shut, and the master electrical grid was entirely locked down by military-grade encryption. The house lights remained stubbornly dimmed, forcing every single eye in the room to remain glued to the blindingly bright digital execution taking place on the screen. Clara coughed weakly on the video, a terrible, rattling sound that made the audience flinch, before her fierce gaze locked back onto the camera lens. "You see, Richard and Monica did not come to Seattle to hold my hand while I died," she stated, her voice slicing through the rising chaos of the room like a surgical blade. "They came because they are completely, hopelessly broke." The screen wiped the cruel text message away. In its place, a rapid cascade of highly confidential banking documents, forged signatures, and real estate deeds flooded the display. Crucial sections were highlighted in glowing red boxes, magnifying the undeniable proof for the entire room to digest. "Take a very good look at the man asking you to trust him with a $25 million seed fund," Clara instructed coldly, her eyes boring into the camera. 3 months ago, Richard forged our deceased grandmother's signature to illegally mortgage her final remaining property. He did this to cover a staggering 7-figure gambling debt he owes to 3 separate offshore syndicates. He currently has exactly $42.16 in his primary checking account. The shocked whispers in the crowd escalated into loud, angry exclamations. The venture capitalists in the front rows, men and women who ruined lives for a living and absolutely despised being played for fools, began pointing furiously at the screen. The financial documents were flawlessly detailed, displaying routing numbers, glaring red overdue notices, and the undeniable reality of a man drowning in his own degenerate greed. On stage, Richard was pacing like a trapped, panicked animal, tugging violently at his silk bow tie as he desperately searched for a physical cable to pull. He looked out at the audience, raising his hands in a pathetic, trembling gesture of defense, but the microphone was entirely dead to him. Monica had finally reached the stage, her $5,000 designer gown tangled around her ankles, her face twisted into a grotesque mask of pure terror as she stared up at the digital ghost of her daughter ruining them in real time. "And this beautiful, heartfelt charity gala?" Clara continued, her pale lips curling into a smile of absolute, chilling contempt. "This foundation is nothing but a hastily constructed, hollow shell company registered in the Cayman Islands exactly 5 days after my funeral." The banking documents vanished, instantly replaced by a series of intercepted email chains. The emails were projected in massive, undeniable font, detailing secret conversations between Richard, his corrupt corporate lawyers, and a notorious money laundering facilitator. "Look at the screen, ladies and gentlemen," Clara demanded, her failing physical strength entirely eclipsed by the sheer force of her vengeance. "Look at the names on those emails. Read the profit-sharing agreements. They are laughing at you. They are explicitly discussing exactly how they plan to siphon 100% of your generous, tax-deductible donations tonight to pay off Richard's gambling markers and fund their permanent retirement in Florida. They are using my corpse as a human shield to rob you blind." The atmosphere in the grand ballroom had transformed completely. The initial shock had mutated into a heavy, suffocating wave of extreme disgust. The high society peers that Richard and Monica had spent decades trying to impress, the people whose validation they craved more than the lives of their own children, were now looking at them as if they were toxic waste. The wealthy investors were pulling out their smartphones, snapping photos of the incriminating emails displayed on the 60-foot screen. eagerly documenting the ultimate social and financial suicide of the Walters family. The pristine, upper-class image that my parents had brutally sacrificed my childhood and my sister's life to maintain was disintegrating into ash right in front of their eyes. They were completely exposed, standing naked under the harsh, unforgiving spotlight of their own monstrous greed. They were no longer the tragic, grieving parents. They were cornered rats, trapped on a brilliantly illuminated stage they had built themselves, slowly drowning in a sea of absolute, unadulterated contempt from the very people they had tried to swindle. The heavy, suffocating silence in the grand ballroom was broken only by the sound of Clara drawing one final, labored breath on the massive screen. The undeniable fury in her eyes softened for just a fraction of a second, melting into a faint, genuinely peaceful smile. It was the smile of a grandmaster who had just executed a flawless, inescapable checkmate. "You came here tonight to steal my life's work," Clara whispered, her gaze shifting slightly, almost as if she were looking directly at Richard and Monica cowering on the stage below. "But you are far too late. By the time this video began playing, my system had already executed its final protocol. Every single patent, every line of core technological code, and every physical asset I have ever owned has been irrevocably transferred into a heavily shielded blind trust. And the sole, uncontested executor possessing absolute, total control over that trust is my little sister, Veronica." A sharp, involuntary gasp escaped Monica's lips. She collapsed onto her knees, the expensive fabric of her designer gown pooling around her on the acrylic stage, realizing that the massive fortune they had already spent in their minds was completely, legally untouchable.
"But I am not finished." Clara's voice hardened, striking like a judge's gavel. "You did not just try to rob my sister. You committed massive financial fraud. You evaded taxes for a decade. You set up a phantom charity to launder stolen money. And because I believe in absolute thoroughness, the exact same digital switch that locked you out of my estate has simultaneously forwarded every single piece of unredacted evidence you just saw on this screen to the Cybercrime Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, as well as the Criminal Investigation Unit of the Internal Revenue Service."
Right on cue, as if Clara had orchestrated the very universe from beyond the grave. The heavy, deafening wail of police sirens pierced the thick, insulated walls of the five-star hotel. The blindingly bright house lights of the grand ballroom suddenly snapped on, completely destroying the moody theatrical atmosphere my parents had so carefully crafted. The heavy oak doors at the back of the hall burst open. A dozen federal agents wearing dark tactical jackets pushed their way into the room, their expressions grim and strictly business. The wealthy investors and socialites scrambled out of the way, practically climbing over their silk-draped tables to distance themselves from the radioactive criminals on the stage. I sat perfectly still at table 47 and watched the beautiful, chaotic finale unfold. Two agents flanked Richard, aggressively pulling his arms behind his back, the sharp, metallic click of heavy handcuffs echoing over the ballroom's silent sound system was the most exquisite music I had ever heard in my entire life. Monica was sobbing hysterically, screaming at the officers, but her pleas fell on completely deaf ears. They were hauled off the stage in absolute, agonizing disgrace. They were leaving this hotel with absolutely nothing, facing decades in a federal penitentiary. I did not stay to watch them get shoved into the back of a squad car. I stood up, smoothed the skirt of my plain black dress, and turned my back on the pathetic, ruined shells of the people who used to call themselves my parents. I walked slowly and calmly through the sea of whispering, shocked guests, pushing through the grand lobby doors and stepping out into the cool, damp night. I closed my eyes and took a long, deep breath of the crisp Seattle air. It smelled like rain and pine, but mostly, it smelled like absolute freedom. I looked up at the dark, cloudy sky and smiled. Clara was gone, but her brilliant, fiercely protective legacy was safe forever. I was finally free. Thank you so very much for listening to my story today. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please let me know in the comments below. If you found today's story engaging and want to help our channel survive, please consider supporting us with just $1. You can easily do this by scanning the QR code on your screen or by using the donation link in the description or the pinned comment. Your incredible generosity allows us to pay our hardworking staff, helping them feed their families and continue bringing you more high-quality stories just like this one. Stay safe and take care of the people who truly matter.